Stephen, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are and where you are on the on Substack.
On Substack. Okay. My name is Stephen Long. um, and I write about men's issues, LGBT issues, spirituality, religion, mental health. Um, I have a long journey of writing on the internet about religious topics. I have done my time as a Christian missionary, as a gay person in the Christian church, fighting for inclusion for gay people. And then I spent 6 years as a leader and prominent member in the Satanic Temple. And now I am unaffiliated religiously and still writing. So that is a short description of what I do.
Nice, and that sounds really interesting. To say the least.
Yeah.
It sounds like quite a journey, and what
Yep.
I'm curious about with that journey is how you got into men's work. So we're going to get into that a little bit here in a moment. And then you also work as a grocery store, like at a grocery store. Am I
Yeah.
correct in that? That I
Yeah,
recall, and
that's
that
right.
you
That's my day job. Yeah.
and that's one of the things that you do is nurture and feed your community. So I thought that was really fascinating as well in terms of what that is. But yeah, I think that that's a very interesting background. I'll admit I have a bit of a somewhat of a similar background. I have another Substack, as I mentioned to you before we got on. I ran about what you called an esoteric and magical practices. I don't have any specific affiliation. I've just kind of been doing my own thing over the years.
Hmm.
But it's always been kind of interesting to me to see like just how varied people are, where someone's background comes from and things like that. So I love that. So tell me a little bit about your journey into men's work. How did you first get into men's work? What did that journey look like? What does it look like now?
Well, so I'm still somewhat of an acolyte men's men's work. Really, I I found myself in a really serious mental health crisis last year. Um, and I had a pretty cataclysmic episode that that lasted for most of the summer. And I have bipolar disorder, and it was very scary and had a lot of psychotic features. And I woke up one morning during that whole situation and realized I don't have a community locally to call in a time of crisis. And
Mm.
that was like the wake up call for me. Because a lot of my friends are very mobile, a lot of my friends are all over the world. But what was really lacking for me was local support and local community. And and that is really what prompted my connection with the Mankind Project. Um,
I'm a fellow
where
initiate.
yes, hello. I have a very complicated and challenging and bittersweet relationship with that organization, and I'm happy to get more into that. Um, but the community that I'm in is one of the largest, maybe the largest MKP communities in the world, and it's great. It's awesome. And so, um, I a mentor of mine who is a leader in MKP really strongly suggested that I get into the Mankind Project just for support. Um, and that's what initiated my journey, and that started in January of this year. But I've always been passionate and concerned and have a lot of empathy for other men, and many of the struggles that men face that are sometimes unique to them, not all the time, of course, but But masculinity and manhood have particular challenges that need to be addressed, right? And I've always just had a natural soft spot for that, and I've always cared about that, and I've written about it quite a bit. And so really what led me into men's work was desperation, which I think is true of many guys, of many people.
Certainly, certainly it was true for me. I mean,
Yeah.
I went through a divorce. I was suicidal before then. I got into a rebound relationship with somebody that was like an alcoholic, and I did, and I didn't realize that at the time. But then, like, I went through like the harshest breakup after that, and I'm just like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life,
Hmm.
and I know that all the narratives of masculinity that I've learned are not serving me, and they're not even really good narratives. They're narratives that basically caused my marriage to crash and burn. They're narratives that caused me to that really played a significant role in my not opening up to other people. And it's interesting because I find that yes, in general, pretty much most men that I encounter that get into this work have had to hit a breaking point where they've pretty much been either suicidal or in a really bad space or both. And it's gotten them to a point where they're like, I have to do something to change my life. And then at that point, they're desperate enough to do something because they've been fed that narrative so long that you have to have it all figured out. You have to act like you're fine. You don't matter. What you feel doesn't matter. So just go out there and white knuckle it through your life. So I resonate with that story right there. And like you, that's one of the reasons why I do this work that I do because I feel so passionately called through it. And I don't want to see other men continue to suffer.
Same. Heard. Right there with you.
And like you, I have my own experiences with MKP that are somewhat mixed. I've also had
Mm,
experiences with other men's organizations, Sacred Sons, Uncivilized, some other stuff out there. And I think it's interesting because really all of them, to one degree or another, have their pluses and their minuses. And this isn't like a knocking on any of them. They all serve a purpose. And part of what I think is the challenge around healthy masculinity is how do we simultaneously get the support we need without necessarily being put into a situation where we're coming across some other narratives that can be just as problematic and unhelpful because the way that they're structured isn't around providing the necessary accountability and responsibility that all men really need.
yeah, 100%. And also there's the trade-off with any community. I've been in nonprofits, I've been in religious communities basically my entire life. Um, Not saying MKP is religious, although I think it is, by my definition of religious. But um,
Okay, we're gonna have to talk about that
yeah,
definition in a moment. Continue.
yes, for sure, for sure. So um, with any community, there's a trade-off where I get support and get community that I desperately need, and I also get their dysfunction, their flaws, and that is true of any community. And so there it is always community is always a calculated, well, it's not always a calculated risk. Sometimes it's just a risk. But the key for me is to make it a calculated risk. How much bullshit am I willing to work with, and how much give and take am I willing to engage with? And because I fight everyone in every community I've ever been in, I always fight. And um I guess that's part of my nature. And so for me the challenge, and I've been, I've had harrowing experiences in some communities. So it's just with any community there will always be a trade-off. And how much of that, and the question is, how much of that am I willing to accept, and when does it become harmful to me in such a way that I need to then move on? And MKP, for all its faults, Mankind Project, for all its faults, is still the type of men that it produces when it's at its best is extraordinary. They're extraordinary, right? Um, and so for now I'm staying. For now I'm staying because the local community here is wonderful, and it has also been an enormous source of pain for me. I wrote an article about my NWTA called "My Nightmare Initiation into the Mankind Project," and it was a near, for threat of sounding dramatic, it was a near fatal experience. It was a catastrophically painful experience in a way that I just cannot call redemptive or good or helpful for me, and in a way that I judge as very dangerous. And it was very dangerous for me, extremely dangerous. Um, and we can talk more about that as well, because there is a dark side to all of this as well, and I have experienced it. Yeah.
I think it. So I'm curious because you said earlier that you kind of saw NKP as a religion, and I'll admit that I have a different take on it. I actually think that in some ways that the spiritual component has been stripped out. It's very, I would call it very cerebral in some ways.
Mhm.
And I'll just say I am involved. I staff at NWTA that do some of the other things. So it's not like
We should define what an NWTA. We're already using all of
yeah.
the internal lingo,
So
and all of my
so we
colleagues
are. So
won't know what that is.
yeah. So I'll briefly, New Warrior Training Adventure is what it stands for, and it is essentially an initiation experience for men, with the premise being that men need to go through initiation in order to transform their lives. As I think, the simplest definition I would say about it. If you want to add anything to that, feel free. But that's my definition, at least for what it is.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree with that. Yeah,
Okay, so define for me, like, talk to me a little bit about the religious piece, because I think that's really fascinating and interesting, and
yeah.
I always find it interesting when people share their own takes on different experiences.
Right. So, um, I believe that I forget the religious scholar who came up with this idea, but I believe that religions typically have four components, which is cultus, creed, code, and community.
Hmm.
So creed is what is true, either about us or the world or the cosmos or whatever, right? And there are certain things that MKP take as true, even if it is symbolically true. The four archetypes, for example, a lot of their processes, a lot of their rituals, for lack of a better term, they are laden with belief about the way the world is and the way men are. Okay, so there
Real
is.
quick,
Yes.
let's also define the archetypes for people who may not know. So the
Yes,
archetypes being
please.
referred to are the magician, the king, the warrior, and the lover. I will say that I find that those four archetypes are incredibly limiting. I think
Hmm.
there's many other masculine archetypes, both positive and negative, that can also be drawn on. But for purposes of this, that's what's being referred to, and specifically the book Magician, Warrior, King, Lover by Roger Moore and Douglas Gillette. Although I might have gotten the title wrong. I mean, that title, I just
The
kind of mixed the
order.
words around.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so yeah, so MKP has a creed, not so much about the external world, but definitely about our internal worlds, right? And what it means to be a man, and the nature of men's psychology, and their, for lack of a better term, their spiritual life. So I would classify all of that under creed. Now, code is how we live in light of it. Okay, so code is how practitioners of religion live in light of the creed. And so in the Mankind Project, for example, you have warrior work where, well, and accountability, and you have clearings, and you have all of that stuff that goes on, and how to live a good life in light of what it means to be the golden warrior, the golden king, et cetera, instead of the shadow warrior, shadow king, shadow lover, etc. Okay, so it has it has a creed and it has a code, and then it also has cultus, and cultus is ritual. And the NWTA is one big fucking ritual. It is laden with ritual. And a lot of the processes that happen in the small groups are ritual. And then the final point is community. And this is what separates a religion from the occult, in my view, where the occult is often, and I love the occult, by the way, obviously, as you can tell by my decor, but the occult is often a more solo venture, whereas um, religion, often baked into it, is the communal aspect. And so those are the people who come together to follow the creed, to act out the code, and with cultists in a community. And I believe that that is a functional definition of religion. And it also means that many things are religions that we wouldn't otherwise think of as religions. And I think that we tend to get very caught in this Western notion of what a religion is. A religion has to be one of the world religions, which mean, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, etc. And so it has to have a book, it has to have places of worship, it has to have political power, and it has to have money. And so it's a very I think the view that we take of religion in the Western world is often very informed by Protestantism and Catholicism, and that becomes the lens through which we look at religion. Where I think religion is everywhere. I
Mm.
think, and I don't use the term religion derogatorily. I think religion is awesome. Actually, in many ways, I love it. I think it's fascinating. And I think little temples, like mold, are just flourishing everywhere. And we don't necessarily always have the eyes to see it, because we are looking at it through an American Protestant lens. So I think the 12 steps are very religious. I think AA is extremely religious. I think the Mankind Project and a lot of men's work is very religious. There was a lot of debate. There is still a lot of debate as to whether my former religious affiliation, the Satanic Temple, is a religion. I 100% believe that it is. Um, so yeah,
So I think
that's
that's
my
a
take.
really, yeah, I think that's a really interesting take on it. And I see where you're coming from. Like that is an interesting take on it when you look at it in that way. And I mean, I can certainly see that. And it's not something I would have considered, but I really appreciate that you went into depth and explained that, because it is something where I think a lot of times people do get this. Also, I would say the Western tendency to categorize and separate things, right? Like, this is that.
Mhm.
Never do these two things combine. Well, maybe yes, maybe not. So, there's that
Also,
aspect too.
it's also important to note that religion is by definition fuzzy. I mean, we get the term religion from the religious holy orders. And so to be religious was to take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience into a Catholic holy order. So the term religion, at least in our, in a Western context, came from it had to do with being bound, and that's kind of the root of the word, is to be bound as to a post, right? It is to be tied to something. And so the, my understanding, I might be wrong about this, but my understanding is that it really comes from religious holy orders. But that was in a time when there was no division between sacred and secular, between religion and secular. The world was simply religious in the same way the laws of gravity and physics are real to us, and that's just the way the world is. And then you get into Eastern philosophies where where the term religion is often more of a Western concept and it tends to break down. And so, scholars have argued for years about what a clear definition of religion is, and basically the best that they can do and the best that I can do is find an arbitrary definition and then just go with that because it's all
Here,
very blurry, right?
yeah. Well, here's what I find fascinating. I mean, we talked a little bit about MKP, but I think what I find fascinating with men's work in general. I mean, you have on the one hand the man, which is
Mhm.
red pill, incels, all that other stuff. And then you have men's movement where it's focused on ideally on men becoming healthy, individuated, being able to express themselves, being able to connect with other men in brotherhood, ultimately, and being able to show up with more presence and awareness in the lives of other people around them. And what I find neat and fascinating, and this kind of goes back to your thing about religion, is that each men's movement that I've experienced and other ones I've looked into definitely have components of exactly what you described. So Sacred Sons has its own weekend experience, which is definitely different from NKP, but has elements of NKP in it. I mean, I think pretty much every men's movement organization has some degree of MKP
Yes.
floated through because it's like that's the OG. And
Yep.
then Civilized has its own take on things. And some of the other organizations and experiences that I've seen or learned from or worked through, and I've been doing a lot of extensive work around this for the last couple of years, where I've even gone and had a number of different experiences through different lenses. There's always there's very much this element of initiation and transformation that's going on. And if nothing else, that in and of itself has that religious aspect to it. Because the idea is that, we're going to go into this and we're going to come out the other side changed, for better or worse. So
I'm
you
so
mentioned
sorry. I'm letting my cat in the. By the way, cats appear in every single live stream I do, so please hold.
all right.
She walked away. Okay, sorry. I have six cats and they bang on my door at inopportune moments. Please continue.
Yeah. So I have two cats myself, so I get it.
Excellent.
But there's this aspect of initiation that who you were before, you're going to come out the other side changed. Now, you talked about your own experience, and so, and said that it was near fatal, which, I hear that, first of all. Um, I'm curious, like, if you feel like sharing, like, how did that transform you, and what did, what did you bring out of that from the other side as a result? Because I can understand why you feel bittersweet under the circumstances.
Yeah. I'm still I'm still processing it. I was um so I should not have gone.
Hmm.
Um there were a couple of people who tried in MKP who tried to warn me away from it. And I found the intake process for it extremely frustrating. I, as I already mentioned, I have bipolar disorder, and that places some pretty serious limits on me that I have always struggled with. It means I have to be extremely careful with my sleep, for one, because sleep sparks mania and psychosis. Okay, poor sleep. Um, intense, sometimes intense emotional experiences can altered states of consciousness, and I had some people, two in particular, try to put on the brakes and caution me some. And it was a very frustrating experience because I tried very hard to do my due diligence. And by design, I couldn't because the new warrior training, the entire weekend is so shrouded in mystery. But what that meant was that I couldn't make an informed decision for myself. And so what I ended up telling the leadership was um one man in particular who knows me extremely well. I was basically like, listen, I'm trying to do my due diligence. I'm trying to make an informed decision for myself. By design, I can't because this thing is a fiercely guarded secret. So I am relying completely on your discretion. If you tell me no, you shouldn't do it, then I won't. If you tell me yes, you can do it, then I will. I am relying on you 100%.
Mm.
And so it meant that the NWTA is designed, and many of these kind of transformative experiences are designed so that men go in blind.
Yeah,
Now,
they're designed to basically get you to go through an edge of sorts.
yeah, yeah. Now, here's the other thing. Talk about edges. I have survived. I survived a shooting when I was 19 years old. Um, I survived ex-gay reparative therapy. I survived. I have survived many bipolar episodes, which could have killed me. Um, and so I'd cut my teeth on my own, dark initiations. And so I went in to the NWTA, and there was a particular component about it. I won't reveal any processes, or the schedule, but I will say that I personally did not get I did not get the sleep that my brain requires. And what that meant was that by the time on that, about there was a process about halfway through the weekend, and I stepped onto the carpet, and it shattered me.
Mm.
And it was not a good shattering. It was I decompensated pretty rapidly, and it was about a particularly devastating experience in my life, the shooting. And instead of being healing, what it brought up was a prof it really, I don't use the word trauma lightly. I think it is overused as a term, but it absolutely re-traumatized me.
Hmm.
It was it and I death spiraled, and it took me about a month to really get out, to really not be fighting for my life afterwards.
Mm.
Um, I'm still dealing with the repercussions of it, and
Sounds like it.
I'm still, it's still coming together for me, but I was in an incredibly vulnerable state and fragile state, and by the time I walked onto that carpet, um, I I I woke up demons that should never have been woken up. You know, some dogs need to stay asleep.
Yeah, there's something to be said for the fact that, like, yes, we're doing this work to work through some, like I was talking with a person the other day about, healing our father wounds and our mother wounds and reparenting ourselves. And I think that that's like really a good example of what I hope is healthy work.
Mhm.
And then yes, I do think there are some things that don't need to be woken up
Yeah.
again.
Yep.
And so, yeah, that it's really important to recognize that. I mean, part of doing this work is ultimately, what am I doing to take care of myself?
Yep.
And what are the people around me doing to take care of me, especially if I'm in a process of initiation and transformation, and making sure that I'm going into a space safely. And I've had a couple of experiences of my own where the safety component wasn't as emphasized as it ought to have been. And it really made me kind of think like, well, why am I? What am I feeling here? Like, is this really healthy for me if I'm coming out of this feeling traumatized instead of coming out of it feeling transformed? And there is a very
Yeah,
real difference between trauma, being re-traumatized and being transformed.
absolutely. And yeah, I described it in my article as a kind of ritual scarification. And it was. It exacted a pretty hideous wound. And and then the reason the aftermath has been very bittersweet is because I have also made some of my dearest friends currently in MKP. And these are friendships that will last regardless of whether I stay in men's work or MKP and whether they stay in men's work or in MKP, right? And um but when a man has a let me rephrase, let me not universalize this. When I had a we're doing the MKP thing, we're sharing right now in the circle. When I um had that horrific experience, what it meant was that I came home extremely alienated. And my friends thought I was in a cult. My husband was was horrified, and he's also a therapist. He's a trained therapist. He works in suicide prevention, and he was mortified. And so I entered this community where I re-entered my community as if I had been spat out of this maw that I really didn't know how to talk about, and I really, in a lot of ways, couldn't talk about. And so I was extremely isolated. And what that meant was that I ended up relying even more on the men, on the brothers, on my fellow initiates. And so what it did was I was I feel like I was put into a position where I was relying on the care of the community that where this wound was exacted. And that is extremely complicated and extremely bittersweet, where I don't know if I would have made it without them.
Yeah, man. I'm in the interview, man. Sorry, said something. Just yeah, just
You're good.
feel free to get yourself in. Sorry, keep going.
You're good. So I don't know in a lot of ways. I mean, they were my lifeline, and I don't know how healthy it is. Um, I don't know how healthy it is that I felt so dependent on that community to get through. That was extremely complicated, and so yeah, it's. So I regret doing the NWTA. I regret doing the initiation, and I'm glad I did. I'm glad I did it. And this is what I wrote about in my follow-up piece called On Being a New Warrior, which is, I quote Doctor Who in an episode. It's the Van Gogh episode where he says, life is a pile of good things and bad things. The bad things don't negate the good things, and the good things don't diminish the bad things. It's
Right.
both. And that's really my experience of the NWTA. I really regret it. I'm glad I did it for different reasons.
I hear that.
Has it further complicated my life? Absolutely. Um, it absolutely has, and it's not what I would have chosen for myself if I had had any idea of what it would have done, of what I would have gone through. Right.
Yeah, this is why I think it's really important to have informed consent on
Yes.
really any of these kinds of weekends or experiences. And it's certainly kind of the approach that I take when I'm coaching men. being very real about like the reality, like, look, we're going to go into some intense areas. And when we do, like if you need like a safe word or whatever you need, in order to protect yourself, to know that like you're going to be heard and witnessed and that we're not going to go to some place you don't want, that can happen.
Yes.
I think that that's like kind of a really crucial element to this aspect of having that, and then having that informed consent is really important. I know that Mankind Project has started doing that with some of what goes on the weekend, and I think that's a good step in the right direction because I think it's
Yes.
important, so that people can make informed choices around what they're getting into or not getting into. And it doesn't mean that the mystery has to get taken away, but rather that, okay, it can be done in a responsible way so that each person can make their best choice. Men's work has many different avenues. You don't have to go away on a weekend experience to go through men's work. It's
Exactly.
just a
Yeah.
matter of finding the right support systems and structures in place. And I definitely think men need men's work. And I think each man has to determine, what's the best experience for me. I almost
Yes.
didn't go to my NWTA because I had an experience where I was sitting in a circle, and I'd gone there like 5 times, and I'd actually led one of the circles. And then right after that, they asked me not to come back because evidently it was something I had done there had upset somebody. And instead of talking about it, it wasn't
Yeah.
it wasn't really talked about. And so then I was like, well, what am I doing then? Why am I going away to this experience? If this is what men's work is like, I don't need that. That's not what I
Yeah.
need. I need supportive community. And in the end, I did go, and I'm glad I went. I had a good experience, and I can also see that I could, but that other experience leading into it definitely kind of made me question it, and it 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 really kind of highlighted to me the importance of with any of this work, like why it's so important to make sure that when people are going into any of these kinds of experiences, that the container is well defined and understood, and that there's the right precautions. And then I've been through experiences, as I mentioned, where like I've been on weekends where they didn't necessarily, and it wasn't through Mankind Project, but I've been on weekends where they didn't like have a medic on the weekend, and they're
Yeah.
having them do pretty strenuous physical activity. And
Hmm.
the potential of coming away with physical injuries is very much real.
Yeah.
And that really, like, after that, I was kind of like, well, do I really want to be involved with that organization? Because
Yeah.
that's not something I necessarily want to be coming away with an injury that I'm having to live with. In my case, it was a fractured rib. Dealing with that for a month was not fun. And people would
Hmm.
say, well, that's kind of the reality. You're going to do this work, but it's like, well, yes and no. I want this work to be transformative. I don't want it to be traumatizing in a way that's not helpful for me.
100%. Yeah, and I think it's also worth bringing up kind of my wild background where, I was a minister in a community where a lot of my colleagues were fetishists, BDSM practitioners, porn stars, sex workers. Um, uh, they used lots of psychedelics. So a lot of my colleagues did what broader society would say is very extreme, hanging from hooks from the ceiling and hanging from hooks in their flesh from the ceiling to attain altered states of consciousness. The satanic temple, we would put on black masses, and black masses are extraordinarily blasphemous, extreme rituals and I was on a council called Ordination Council with 6 people, and basically what we did was we oversaw the ministry of the Satanic Temple, the body of clergy, the global clergy of what is the world's largest satanic organization. largest satanic church. And so I say all that to emphasize that I don't have a problem with people doing extreme things. Right. I'm truly a believer in radical bodily autonomy. Um, but there's I have seen people I know and love do insane shit, right? And I am extraordinarily vanilla by comparison, right? I am extraordinarily milk toast. I am so normie in comparison to a lot of people I worked with. But the other side of radical bodily autonomy is radical informed consent.
Right.
And they go together. And so if someone wants to go on a perilous and dangerous shamanistic journey and acutely sleep deprive themselves, by all means do so. You have my blessing. Um, it's a question, it is, and in a situation like that, or like an intense men's retreat, or really any mountaintop experience, there's no such thing as absolute safety, nor should there be, right? Absolute safety is an illusion, and also absolute safety can remove the transformative element, but it is about mitigating risk. And so, I really think that I was a system failure. And, I raised the alarm in my article, and I'm happy to say that the organization I feel is taking me seriously. And I also just have to wonder how many other me's there are who don't speak up, because we have to remember that we're still dealing with men who have a lifetime of programming to not reveal their wounds to anyone, even their spouses. And a single weekend is not going to undo that lifetime of training.
No, it won't. I mean,
Yeah.
case in point, I've gone and I mean, I've had a few, like I said, I've had a number of different weekends and I've done a lot of this work in the last few years. I've done a deep dive into it and I've still had moments where with my beloved, I have not shared stuff that's come up
Yeah.
and she's had to pry it out of me. And that's a
Yeah.
lifetime of conditioning right there. So that's
Exactly.
absolutely the case. Like it's not, anyone who goes into any of these experiences and thinking like, oh, weekend's going to do it. No, the weekend's just the start. And really, every single day is just another day where you're on this journey to undo this societal programming and to decide who you want to be. And
Yeah.
that means that it's gonna be a lot of hard work, and there's gonna be times where you're gonna slip up and go back down the route. And you're right. If there's a situation where you're like, well, I went through this and this was really traumatizing, but I want to belong to this community. Like, are you going to speak up? Not necessarily, because you're going to be that. There's that risk. I would say, I said the you thing, but it should be I statement. But still, I mean, I think in this case we kind of generally apply it to men.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, for sure. So, um, you know, I I am extremely unusual in my willingness to get in front of literally thousands of people on Substack and basically emotionally strip naked, which is I've made a job of doing that. I practice, so the type of writing that I do is some form of like journalistic nudism. Um, Most men are not going to do that. And so if a guy has a really horrific experience on one of these events, the way I like to think about it is culturally men are rabbits. Where I had a friend, he had a pet rabbit. One day his rabbit was hopping around doing rabbit things, right? And then the next day the rabbit was dead. And the reason is because rabbits are prey animals, and same with cats. They're prey animals, and so therefore they hide all of their maladies, their sickness, whatever, as a defense mechanism until they die of it, right? And culturally, that's the way many men are. And so when someone has a really horrific experience at one of these events, I think that that is often what will happen is they will slink away and lick their wounds, or they will stay and just not talk about it. They won't bring it to the organization. They won't yell about it often. And I really, my worry, my concern is that a lot of these organizations, MKP and others, simply don't know how many men are in that position. A, because men, A, because culturally men are programmed not to talk. And B, I judge that some of these organizations don't do adequate follow-up. So that's my concern. And none of this is to say that these events are not extraordinary for many guys, for many people. And, I see it as like psychedelics where, you can take a heroic dose of psilocybin and you can have the beatific vision, or you are in the seventh circle of hell. Um, and that doesn't mean that people shouldn't do psychedelics. And that doesn't mean that it isn't transformative for many people. Um, but it can also destroy lives, right? It can also, and if I did not have the support that I had, um, if I didn't have the husband that I have, if I went home to an empty house, if I if I didn't have the friends, if I didn't have a robust local men's group, which many guys don't, right? When they go to these things. And so you know, yeah, those are my concerns. And trust me, I've been screaming about them. I'm not quiet.
Well, that's pretty clear, and I honor
Yes.
that. I think that's
Yeah.
really important. It is. It's not, I mean, I know after I did my initiation weekend, and I joined another group, I actually was like very frank about it. I was like, look, I don't want to belong to a group where we're just going to go and like kick somebody out who does something where maybe that person doesn't even fully know what the problem is, and needs, there needs to be a conversation, because that was the experience I'd had. And I'm like, I don't need that. Like, that's not what I need in my life right now. I need stability.
Yeah.
So I spoke up for what I needed and spoke to that. And it was really important to me that I had that. And I think, yeah, like not every man's going to do that. It's interesting because, there's a stereotype of men being like really aggressive and everything else, but like you're right, a lot of men will act like rabbits or like cats. They won't really acknowledge what's going on, and it actually takes a lot for a man to get to that point. I went even through this exercise last summer. I was reading actually a book called Unbound. It was like a woman's guide to power. So that was what was fascinating about it. But one of the exercises that the author had her readers do was one where it was like, the conversation I'm not having here. So I started doing that every day, writing it down. And it was fascinating for me to see all the different places where I wasn't having the conversation I needed to be having at the time.
Mm,
So really, I mean, I think even that's like a great example of like for anyone who's watching this, like, you need something to journal about in your life right now, like write that down. The conversation I'm not having is, and then complete the sentence and do that every day.
that is
Because
brilliant. Yeah.
because that's going to at least help you get clear on the conversation you're not having. And I'm not saying that you automatically go out there. I didn't automatically go and have conversations with people, but it helped me recognize that I wasn't choosing to have, that I was choosing not to have conversations, and how that was impacting and affecting me on many different levels. And so I started being able to have some of those conversations. I don't think we're trained how to do that. And even when we go into a container where it's like, oh, you're going to learn how to speak to your feelings, you're going to learn how to do some of those things. Okay, great. And we're not always taught how to handle confrontation, even out of that. Just because I know my feelings a bit better doesn't mean that I'm going to necessarily go and say to my partner, for example, here's the unpleasant thing that I don't want you to hear, but I know I need to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. So that kind of consistent practice is actually something that that I've been thinking about because I think because of the mind that I have had to focus most of my attention on what does stable, consistent practice look like. And by practice, I mean everything from a spiritual practice to um to what does it mean to live a virtuous life? What does it mean to embody courage and temperance and wisdom and justice and compassion right now, right? Because um, this moment is my life, or that moment when I'm at work and I'm exhausted. That is where that that is the essence of the spiritual life, right? And so I think in many ways I have a bit of a sharp difference of philosophy or emphasis rather from what what MKP is doing with the Mankind Project is doing with the New Warrior Training Adventure and other similar weekends, where in many ways I think the mountaintop is it's incredibly powerful. We need it, right? It's often necessary. And one of the reasons why it's necessary is because without it, there are many people who will simply never know that there is a different way to live, right? That there is another option out there. And so I think one of the real benefits of mountaintop experiences like be it an altered state of consciousness, an ecstatic religious experience, or a transformative weekend retreat, is that it will open the vista for people and it will show them a new direction and it will show them there's a different way to live my life. And I think that that is really, really, really crucial and really important. And I have benefited from those experiences through my life. And I think that then eventually we have to put on our fucking boots and walk because most, and I don't think anyone would disagree with me on that. But I think that the type of, because of the brain that I have, my, what I'm interested in and what I'm interested in cultivating and what I'm interested in helping other men do is what does that daily walking look like? You know, because the valley is where we live 99% of our lives. And so what does it look like to maintain virtue and connection and compassion right now and on a daily basis? And what does that discipline look like? That's what gets me going. Like that is what gets me very excited. And part of that is because part of the reason is because that's what I'm limited to often. Um, and it's also where we live our lives. And
It's true.
so, you know, I think in many ways I see and appreciate the power of something like a transformative men's weekend like the NWTA. By the same token, I sometimes wonder if there's a deceptiveness that comes from mountaintops because I think it's very easy for people, and it's easy for me to come to believe that the spiritual life consists of altered states of consciousness, that that experience on the mountaintop is the pinnacle, when
Mhm.
actually it is this moment, right? It is right now, and it is this moment until we die. So that,
I want to, yeah,
what's that?
I want to respond to that.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So last year, I, uh, I broke up with the person I was with. It was not a good relationship. And then I left my job at the end of August. I was going to go back to school to become a therapist. And I realized I had a moment of clarity. I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't know what I want to do with my life, but that's not what I want to do. I don't want to jump through 2 years of graduate school and take on a lot of there, take on, a lot of debt and then go through another 2 years of jumping through hoops, which is what I was looking at least. So I stopped doing that and I didn't go back to work the job. I had, some money put aside. I was like, all right, just going to give myself some time here. And I went through six, about six different experiences that were kind of initiatory experiences in their own right. Some of them were just regular trainings, like learning some stuff, but some of them were more of these weekends, one after the other after the other. And one of the reasons I did that was because it was like, okay, there's some certain changes I want to make in my life. I'm going to basically force through this personality change. And in the short term, that worked. I was able to make a lot of changes and I was able to ultimately melt the ice in my heart and heal my wounds around my relationship with the feminine. And that was huge. And yet, in the long term, what I've come to recognize is that once I came down from all of that and I was kind of back in the regular bit of life, I still had to face some of the same challenges that I've always had to face. Like I deal with anxiety. But for me, anxiety is one of my issues, and it's something I work with men around. Feeling anxiety every day is not fun. It is
Exactly.
absolutely not fun at all.
Yeah.
There are, it's like the moment where you're like, oh, I got to go do the hard thing. And like that voice is like, well, you can't do it. And I've got to do it. I don't want to numb myself out on alcohol or weed or porn or any of those other things. So what I've really found from my own practice is those weekends can be great in terms of producing some kind of short-term awareness and change. And if you do them one after another, you'll definitely sustain that for a bit of time. But at some point, you have to come down. And it's landing in that valley and being willing to take the steps forward and doing it with the realization that each day is its own step. And applying what I'd call the philosophy of Kaizen. If you're not familiar with it, Kaizen
Mm,
is a philosophy of where it's like you make short, small changes or small transformations to your process in order to create big change. It's not about trying to change everything all at once. It's about making little changes, little steps. So, like for example, if I have trouble sleeping, I'm going to start going to bed a half hour earlier because maybe the problem is, or I'm going to stop doing screen time for 5 minutes earlier in the day than I would otherwise. Things like that, making little changes. And I think that that's a huge part of exactly what you're talking about. Like, how do I make the small changes in my life that create the sustainable outcome that I'm looking for instead of continuing to put myself into a situation where I'm hoping that one weekend or another weekend or another transformative experience here is going to give me what I need. The reality for me is that that hasn't worked. I've had
yes,
some amazing transformative experiences, and at the end of the day, I've ultimately had to put one foot in front of the other and just keep walking forward and do the best I can with what I've got. And I think that that has been actually the most powerful transformative experience because it's living my life in each day and incorporating and embodying that work and knowing that there are going to be days where I'm going to wake up and feel anxious. I'm going to feel afraid. I'm going to struggle. And I can live with that and find my way forward. I can do the best I can that day and know that that does not make me less of a man or a person or anything else. It just makes me a very much a real human being, just like anyone else, having their struggles and challenges.
exactly. Yeah, and so that that is the kind of work that that I'm most passionate about. And I'm not saying it at all to negate the importance of the mountaintop. The mountaintop is going to happen at some point in a person's life. And it's good, can be good, depending, but whether it is good or not depends, I guess, on how they would quote unquote integrate it. But I really the you know, Brother Lawrence, a Catholic mystic, he was a cook in a monastery, and he said, "When I flip the pancake, I do so to the glory of God."
Mm.
Right? That kind of presence and discipline, um, that to me is where the real work is. The truly transformative stuff is for me. And Alan Watts said, if you can't meditate in a boiler room, then you can't meditate. Um and I think that there is something sometimes uh I I, I s- I sometimes think that pinnacle mountaintop spiritual experiences or transformative experiences, um while including all the caveats that they are often necessary and very helpful, there's also something kind of easy about them, right? It's like you take again take the example of psychedelics. Take a heroic dose of mushrooms, or take ayahuasca in the jungle. It's like it's coming for you. Like that experience, something your consciousness will change. Like there, it is coming for you, and you kind of fall into it, right? There's this kind of letting go into it. Um, and while it can be harrowing and intense, there's, in a sense, it's also easy by comparison to practicing virtue and compassion and health and a healthy spirituality in the day to day, in the quotidian, by in flipping the pancake and doing so to the glory of God every time, right? That's the kind of work that I'm interested in, and that's what gets me going. And so, people have asked me if I will ever staff an NWTA, or staff a transformative experience like it. Um, and right now, obviously, the answer is no, because I'm still processing my own, and it was such a devastating experience. And I don't right now, I don't know if I want to be present when other men step onto that carpet in that setting, because after what I experienced, I don't think I could in good conscience be there. I don't think I could in good conscience condone it with my presence. Um, and that might change, right? I'm very open to that shifting. Um, but I think that if I were to be present at that, I wouldn't be able to shake the feeling that I am doing something unethical because of my own experience,
Hmm.
by being present for that. And that is subjective, and it also is not to pass judgment on other men who choose to do it, who choose to be present for that, right? That's just me. Um, but then I also think I just have a difference in emphasis on what I want to focus on, right? Um, yeah, I've rambled for quite a bit. I'll let you fill the airtime.
Well, I appreciate the rambles. I mean, it's been a very enjoyable conversation. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a place for all types of men's work, and I think that recognizing, like, kind of exactly what we spoke to earlier, which is like, what do you do on the everyday, is just as important and not emphasized and talked about as much.
Yes.
This work doesn't, like you said, this work doesn't happen in a weekend. It happens for the rest of your life. It really does. I don't know a man who just like suddenly is like issues fixed. I mean, I've talked to men who are in their 60s and their 70s and they still have things they struggle with. Not a person alive I know that doesn't have that issue in one form or another. And think when anyone tries to bypass that and act like, oh, like I don't have any struggle or challenge. Like I kind of had that the other day where I think it was actually a post I reached back from you. The person started to basically be like, oh, well, it's like if you're doing like meditation, they'll take care of all that. And I'm like, no, I've had some actually unhealthy experiences with
Yes.
meditation practices where I tried to white knuckle my way through life for a long time on meditation practice alone, and it did not help. It actually
Yep.
created problems. I'm going to write a post about it later on, but it's exactly that. It's like, no, you can't, like one size fits all prescriptions don't apply here. Each person has their own needs and challenges. So I think that it's just a very real thing to acknowledge and honor that, and that, it's really important that we're open to all the different variations of how the work is expressed and explored, from the everyday to the weekend experience. And that a weekend experience can be a very powerful and moving thing. And those men still need to integrate. They still
Yes,
need to they still need to reintegrate back into their life, and they need to figure out how am I going to do this moving forward.
absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And you know, there's a Greek word that I love. Um, I forget the author, but in the Immortality Key, um, the book The Immortality Key, something Murerescu. I can't remember his first name, but he talks in that book. He talks about the Greek term pharmakon, which of course is the word that we get for where we get pharmacy from, and so on. But his take on the word is really interesting, which is pharmakon means both the poison and the cure.
Hmm.
And really everything is pharmakon. And it depends on set and setting, and it depends on the person taking it. It depends on the context. It depends on the intention. And so something like men's work or specific types of men's work, be it a weekend, it's pharmakon. It is both poison and cure, depending on who's doing it, depending on context, depending on all of these different variables. And so, and the same is true of meditation. The same is true of all this stuff is it's pharmakon. And I do think that we tend to get caught into this binary of, well, meditation is all good and no harm can come from that, or men's work is all, something like the NWTA is all good and nothing, or it's all bad, right? And it will, and it's a terrible thing that needs to be, shut down, right? But when really it's pharmakon, it is poison and cure depending on context.
Mm. I think this is a good spot to wrap up. I just want to thank you for coming on here. I really enjoyed this interview and this conversation. It was absolutely fascinating. And, for those of you who are watching, there are many different shades of mentor. And it's not all about it. It really does come right down, I think, ultimately to what we talked about. It's that everyday experience. How do I take this and move it forward into my life?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for talking.
Good meeting you, brother. Take care.
You too. You as well.